The Battle of Kargil in 1948, fought during the First Indo-Pakistan War of 1947–1948, was one of the most strategically decisive yet historically underappreciated campaigns in the early military history of independent India. Overshadowed in public memory by far more widely discussed Kargil conflict of 1999, the 1948 battle was in many ways more foundational. It determined the fate of Ladakh, secured the fragile territorial integrity of a newly independent state, and established the operational doctrines that would define mountain warfare in the subcontinent for decades. Found in some of the harshest Fought in some of the harshest terrain on earth under extreme climatic conditions and amid political uncertainty, the battle demonstrated the interplay of geography, logistics, leadership, and high altitude warfare's endurance. The origin of the conflict lay in the partition of British India in 1947's August, and the subsequent princely state crisis in Jammu and Kashmir when tribal militias backed by Pakistan entered Kashmir in October 1947. The Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir acceded, acceded to India, promoting the Indian Army's intervention. While the initial fighting centered around Srinagar, Baramulla, and Uri, the conflict soon expanded into multiple sectors across the mountainous expanse of the region. In early 1948, Pakistani forces, including irregular tribal fighters and elements of regular units, shifted focus towards strategically vital corridor linking Srinagar to Leh via Dras and Kargil. This road was not merely a supply line, it was the only viable artery connecting Ladakh to the rest of India. If severed, Ladakh would be isolated, militarily vulnerable, and politically exposed. Kargil's geography explains its importance. Situated along the Suru River valley, surrounded by towering ridgelines and snowbound passes, Kargil controls movement along the narrow Srinagar-Leh highway. The surrounding height offers commanding observation firing posts over the valley below. In mountain warfare, elevation is power. Whoever holds the height dominates the approaches. In early 1948, Pakistani forces infiltrated and occupied several key positions overlooking the road. The aim was clear: disrupt Indian logistics, isolate Leh, and consolidate control over western Ladakh. By establishing interconnected strongholds stretching from Skardu to Kargil and Dras, they sought to create a continuous arc of control linking the northern and western sectors under their influence. For India, the implications were severe. The country was barely months old, its armed forces undergoing reorganization after partition. Command structure was still stabilizing, resources were limited, and multiple fronts demanded attention. Yet the loss of Ladakh was not an option. The region was geographically sensitive, bordering Tibet and indirectly China. It, had al- it also had symbolic value as part of the acceded state of Jammu and Kashmir. The response required rapid mobilization under extreme conditions. Reinforcement had to be transported over precarious mountains, roads vulnerable to enemy fire and avalanches. In many instances, soldiers marched for days at high altitude, carrying equipment manually or relying on mule columns. The combination of thin air, sub-zero temperatures, and steep gradients tested physical endurance to the limit. Indian formations such as the 5th Line Infantry Brigade and units including the 1st Pati- Patiala Regiment were deployed to stabilize the sector. Combat in this theater was unlikely conventional warfare on plains. There were no sweeping maneuvers, no large mechanized thrust. Instead, progress was measured ridge by ridge, feature by feature. Each peak became a fortified objective. Attacking uphill against entrenched defenders required meticulous planning, extraordinary courage, frostbite, exhaustion, and logistical shortfalls compounding the challenge. Yet troops gradually began reclaiming positions, restoring partial control over segments of the road and restabilizing tenuous communication lines with Leh. Air power proved critical in sustaining operations. The Indian Air Force utilized transport aircraft, notably Dakotas, to airlift supplies and personnel and to drop provisions to isolated units. In terrain where roads could be cut off by shelling or landslides, air supply often made the difference between holding and losing a position. This integration of air logistics with ground operations was an early demonstration of joint warfare in independent India's military practice. It underscored a fundamental principle: in high altitude conflict, logistics is strategy. The turning point in a broader campaign came with the operation to secure Zojila, the mountain pass that controlled access between the Kashmir Valley and the Kargil Dras sector. Pakistani forces had established strong positions there, effectively blocking Indian advances. In response, Indian commanders devised a bold plan involving the use of armor at unprecedented altitudes. Tanks, primarily modified Sherman models, were dismantled, transported in parts, reassembled, and deployed in mountainous terrain exceeding 11,000 feet above sea level. The subsequent armored assault during Operation Bison in November 1948 stunned the defenders. The psychological and tactical impact of tanks appearing in such inhospitable terrain forced Pakistani forces into retreat. The reopening of Zojila enabled Indian troops to press forward towards Dras and Kargil with renewed momentum. Following the breakthrough, Indian forces intensified operations to clear remaining enemy-held positions in the Kargil region. Fighting remained fierce and costly. The nature of mountain warfare meant that even minor territorial gains required disproportionate effort. Nevertheless, by late 1948, Indian troops had resecured Kargil and restored the land link to Ladakh. The recapture of these positions ensured that Ladakh would remain under Indian control when the United States brokered ceasefire came into effect in January 1949. The ceasefire line, later known as the Line of Control, froze territorial positions largely along the lines established by the end of hostilities. Kargil remained on the Indian side while areas such as Kardu and parts of Baltistan stayed under Pakistan administration. The legacy of 1948 Kargil extends beyond its immediate military outcomes. It shaped India's strategic thinking about the vulnerability of high altitude frontiers. The experience reinforced the necessity of maintaining permanent posts on key ridgelines and passes, and a lesson that would resonate during subsequent conflicts, including the 1962 Sino-Indian War and the 1999 Kargil War. It also demonstrated the importance of infrastructure development in broader regions, roads, airstrips, and logistical hubs that became not just developmental projects but instruments of national security. Politically, the battle solidified India's claim over Ladakh within the broader Kashmir dispute. Had the region fallen during the 1948 operations, the geopolitical map of South Asia might look very different. Control over Ladakh carries implications not only for India and Pakistan relations but but also for India's strategic positioning vis-a-vis China. Thus, the seemingly localized engagement around Kargil had long-term ramifications for regional power balances. The human dimensions of the battle remain central to its historical significance. Soldiers fought under conditions that would challenge every modern well-equipped armies. Many were young recruits in a newly formed national force, confronting not only an external adversary but also the physical extremities of the Himalayas. Casualties were sustained not only from enemy fire but from exposure, altitude sickness, and logistical deprivation. Their perseverance laid the groundwork for India's evolving mountain warfare doctrine and contributed to the institutional memory of the armed forces. In retrospect, the 1948 Battle of Kargil represents a convergence of geography, strategy, and national survival. It was a campaign in which terrain dictated tactics, logics defined possibilities, and results compensated for material limitations. While later conflicts have drawn greater public attention, the events of 1948 were decisive in securing India's hold over Ladakh and shaping the enduring contours of the Kashmir dispute. The ridgelines above Kargil, contested in that first war, remain emblematic of the broader struggle to control in the Himalayas. The battle stands as a testament to the role of high altitude warfare in South Asian military history and to the enduring influence of the First Indo Pakistani War on the region's geopolitical landscape.